Hi, Dave from Informed American here, talking about what a Biden presidency could mean for you. 5 ways a Joe Biden administration could change America. Joining me to break that down for you is the editor of InformedAmerican.com, Mr. Rodney Johnson. Rodney, good morning.
Good morning, Dave.
Rodney, to say the political world over the last few months has been contentious is an understatement.
Right.
But as the dust has settled, we have a President Joe Biden, and perhaps maybe even more importantly, a 50-50 split in the Senate. So that opens up more things for more items on the President Joe Biden's agenda to be passed through, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, it's not as clear cut because, of course, the split in the Senate is 50-50. That puts Kamala Harris as the tiebreaker, but only when there's a tie. It means that the moderates in the Senate, Joe Manchin for Democrats, Collins and Murkowski, and even Romney for the Republicans, could sway legislation before it ever gets to a tie. But still, it's there, no question. And the Democrats are going to be able to seat the committee chairs, which is pretty important.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly much more likely than, say, a Mitch McConnell-controlled Senate who would just block, and having a deadlocked government. So let's talk about some of these 5 things that could happen, that we could see, that could really change the United States, U.S. policy. Let's start with taxes. Joe Biden has said throughout the campaign that he did not like the 2017 tax cuts. He appears to be going after the wealthy. In his case, his tax plan going after those making over $400,000. He's going to raise the top marginal rate about 3%. Corporate taxes could go up from about 21 to 28%, expanding the child tax credit, maybe some things for some first-time home buyers. Remains to be seen what there is in there for the middle class, but all told, the proposal is about a $3 trillion increase over 10 years, Rodney.
It is. And it's not like he wants to take that money and put it toward deficits. He wants to take the money and spend it on other things, on social issues, childcare and things like that. And so I think some of it will go through. Clawing back some of the corporate tax reduction has been a big issue for a long time. Raising the taxes, I don't know how much that's going to happen. The big question for me is SALT taxes, and that's kind of a redundancy there. It's a state and local tax, SALT. And so there was a cap on how much you could write off of your federal taxes. And this was a big thing that actually put more tax burden on the higher income people and people with more assets in high income states like Massachusetts and New York and New Jersey and California. And so it's been a sticky point for Democrats since that was passed in 2017 because they want to repeal it. They want to lower their taxes. Yeah. And so it's going to be interesting to see if they can make that happen because it is clearly a gift to people of means and wealth. And that's not a very progressive statement. So I'm interested in seeing how that fight plays out, but I do expect higher taxes on people who are making more and on corporations under a Biden presidency.
Yeah, that state and local deduction, I believe, was capped at $10,000. Yep. That was a big issue for Democrats. They tried to, I think, put it into every bill after that was after the 2017 tax cuts. Now, I did mention middle class, and you suggested maybe this isn't about balancing the books. So maybe the middle class could see a tax cut then,
I doubt it, because remember the 2017 Jobs and Tax Reduction Tax Cut Act was not passed with a supermajority in the Senate. It was passed on budget reconciliation, which was just a simple majority, which means that it's required to be neutral, budget neutral over 10 years. And to do that, they had to put in that they would start adding back taxes on the middle class and other things starting in 2025. Mm-hmm. And so I think what's going to happen instead of, people in middle America getting another tax break, they will instead see their current tax rate remain the same, where they simply push off those tax increases that are already on the books that are supposed to take place automatically in the next several years.
So let's move on to spending, Rodney. Joe Biden has a big spending plan, about $5.5 trillion over 10 years. A good chunk of that is going to go to his green energy plan and in a bid to make the U.S. carbon neutral by 2050. That's quite ambitious, isn't it, Rodney?
With the technology and the infrastructure we have today, it's not ambitious. It's impossible. It will not happen because we don't have a way to get enough electricity generated and meet peak demand with the different technologies and infrastructure we have. And so it would require essentially moving mountains. And I don't think that's going to happen, but we will get some big spending that direction. And it's worth noting that in the House of Representatives, they adopt rules at the beginning of every Congress. And so this is the 117th Congress, and they adopted a couple of rules. And one of them was they exempted climate change from PAYGO. And PAYGO is what's called pay as you go. It means that when you introduce legislation that requires payment of some sort, that you show how you're going to pay for it by reducing spending somewhere else. And so they said, look, we don't want to do that with anything COVID-19 related because we don't want to slow it down. That kind of makes some sense. But they also said we don't want to do it with anything related to climate change. And so this was a clear signal that you're going to get tremendous legislation from the House that says this is how we're going to attack climate change. And they're going to attach it to everything. I mean, if you look at it from 10,000 feet, 30,000 feet, 100,000 feet, you can make the climate or environment touch anything you want. And I think that's what you're going to see.
Well, yeah, it's the same with health, right? Since we're all alive, and so any piece of legislation could potentially be health related or climate related.
Right, and so I think we're going to see a lot of proposals for the disparate impact of green energy versus fossil fuel, different neighborhoods, pollution, cars in concrete areas that don't have trees. There are going to be things that just kind of boggle the mind that's what we're talking about in Congress. And it's all going to come down to the same thing, spending more money.
Yeah. Biden also has a large infrastructure plan, a little over $1 trillion. What do you make of that?
It's connected to the green energy, right? I mean, you don't want to just create new energy production where you're going to put more wind farms out in West Texas, or you're going to put more hydro somewhere else. You're also going to pave roads. You're going to rebuild bridges. You're going to kind of revamp the infrastructure of the United States, which we've talked about forever, right? There are different organizations that give the United States a C- or a D when it comes to our infrastructure because it's so old and past its useful life. And that's going to be plugged as a make work program. That's going to be one of these economic stimulus things, a jobs creator, where the federal government says, look, we're going to put, and I think it's going to be $2 trillion. We're going to call it $1 trillion, $2 trillion toward this. And we're going to go out there and say, let's just rebuild it all. And let's do it in a way that is green, and let's put people back to work. And so it's going to be a lot of deficit spending. That's for sure.
Lots and lots of spending on the way if this can go through both houses of Congress. Ronnie, I want to pivot to student loans. Student loans have ballooned to $1.6 trillion. Joe Biden has two plans on this. One of them is to forgive basically the first $10,000 for all borrowers. And then there's an even more ambitious plan to forgive all debt for those earning up to $125,000 with some caveats of having attended public university, I believe. What do you see coming down the pipe for student loan relief?
I think it's going to be easier. Well, first of all, he can do either. The way that we structure student loans now, the federal government writes essentially all of them. And they are overseen by the Department of Education. The Secretary of Education has the power to determine forgiveness. And you would think that comes with, if you're hurt or, you can no longer perform job functions and you have student loan, maybe you don't have to pay it anymore. But we're talking about just straight up saying, nope, I forgive it. And so it can be done at the stroke of a pen legally. Now, that's not going to sit well with a lot of people because we have to remember only about 35% of Americans are getting a college degree right now, meaning, the newest class coming out. That means the other 65% are going to be sharing the burden for paying these people's student loans when that's a voluntary debt. Nobody told you to go out and do this. Nobody, forced you to make this happen. And so I have a real problem with it. I put myself through college with some student loans, grad school, and each of my kids, I paid for them. And so it doesn't speak well to people who didn't have any touch with the system, so they didn't take loans, or people who had a touch with the system and paid off their loans. They did what they needed to do. And I, like everyone else, have heard the horror stories about taking, all the debts that people do. Yeah. That's not the norm. The norm is about $25,000, $30,000 in debt. The real struggle are the people who take on some student loan debt and never get a degree because then they don't have the benefit and yet they have all the burden. I think that's on the universities. I think that's where this responsibility lies. And I also think that if you pay off debt, You haven't fixed the problem. The problem is college is wildly expensive in a way that makes no sense.
Right.
And so if you just go through once and pay it off, all you've done is set a precedence for the next time you're going to go through and pay it off. And so that's very frustrating. I think that he will do something like the first 10,000. And I think that a lot of people will be really, really angry about it.
Yeah, I think they will. On the other hand, I guess those who have that have that debt will be thankful to see it erased. On the other
Of course, who wouldn't, right? If somebody came along, but I've written about this. Wouldn't you be happier if he paid off car loans? Why aren't we doing that? If the idea is that you have a loan that is a burden because you can't use money to do something else, why wouldn't you instead give everyone $10,000 towards a car? Because more people use cars for work and other stuff than have student loans. That would actually help more Americans. But it would not help people in inner cities because guess what? More of them don't have cars. If you really want to do this correctly, which is attacking a burden that someone didn't take on voluntarily that holds them from other things, why don't you pay off medical debt? I don't know anybody who says, hey, I would love to go to the hospital and have a real problem and come out with medical debt. That's not a choice that most people are making. And yet a lot of people have it. And so there is a case to be made that if you're going to pay off debt, you shouldn't be looking at education, which is voluntary and actually puts you in a better place for earnings down the road. You should be looking at something like medical debt that holds you back.
No, interesting perspective there. Ronnie, many of our viewers have money in the stock market, either funding their retirement accounts or whatever personal investments they have. So I'd like to, if you could give a general outlook for the stock market under a Biden presidency.
There's competing forces in this one. You know, when you come from a President Trump administration where it was lower regulation, lower taxes, more business friendly, it was certainly a supercharger to the markets. And it was combined with a very accommodative Federal Reserve for the most part, certainly, you know, during the pandemic. And so when the Federal Reserve is printing $120 billion a month, then you're going to get some follow through into the equity markets. And that's not going to change under Biden, at least in the short term. The Federal Reserve met in December. We saw the minutes last week, and they said, look, we believe that we're going to continue on this path at least through 2021. But the question comes after that. If the Federal Reserve pulls back at the same time that Biden has perhaps raised taxes, not just on corporations, which lowers their profits, but also on the wealthiest, then you're setting up a situation where perhaps the market gets pretty choppy and we have a pullback from where we are, which is, of course, record highs. And so I think we're looking at a pretty good situation, at least for the first 6-9 months. But maybe when we get into the second year of a Biden presidency, things could get a little bit more difficult.
And if you're looking for a more detailed analysis on the stock market and what a Biden presidency will mean for your wallet, just go ahead and click down below to get access to our special report. Ronnie, let's close with some sticky political issues. Our fifth topic here. Throughout the campaign, Biden dodged questions about court packing, something that many Democrats are pushing to expand the court. What do you make of that?
I don't think he's going to be able to. And it comes back to the split Senate because to pack the court, you would need 50% of the Senate to say they want to do this and then have Kamala Harris cast a deciding vote. And Manchin of West Virginia, a moderate Democrat, has already said he's not on board with that. I'd imagine there's at least 2 or 3 other Democrats who are not on board with that. So I think that's a bit of a no-go. And hopefully that plays for some other things that he'd be considering as well.
Rodney, what about immigration? That was certainly a contentious topic in 2016 and really been an issue for decades. What can we see potentially on the immigration front now with the Biden presidency and a split Senate?
Well, that's very interesting because Joe Biden was vice president, of course, when we started with the detention that split families. And we did end up with people in cages. You know, it is what it is, but that was under Obama. I'm not blaming them with that term. I'm pointing out that it was a Flores court decision that said, hey, you cannot detain children past 20 days or something like that. And so it ended up making everything weird, which is why you saw much larger numbers of children and people with children coming over the border, is because everybody reads the news. They know what happens. And so if your best chance is to show up at the border with a child, why wouldn't you do such a thing? Yeah. And so President Trump dealt with it. He dealt with a number of ways, certainly with the emergency repatriation back to Mexico, holding people in Mexico and then considering their asylum cases. I think some of that's going to change. And I think we're going to have larger numbers of people coming through the southern border because it won't be the same sort of forceful enforcement that we've had. But I also think you're going to have much larger legal immigration. And so Trump dramatically cut down the number of visas that were going to be issued. He dramatically cut down on the lottery visas that we were issuing. And I think you're going to see those reverse and go higher.
And will we see a maybe that grand bargain that you've heard about, a path to citizenship or amnesty come through in legislation?
Absolutely. The dreamers. And so the dreamers, and who doesn't feel for these kids, right? You're brought to the United States when you're 1 or you're 3 or you're an infant. You don't know anything else. You're here, right? And so you go to school here and you kind of come along, and then you reach 17, 18. And whether you know it the entire time or then, that's when your life turns upside down, because there's so many things you cannot do. And so your home country is Guatemala or Honduras or wherever it is that you've never been, and you know nothing of it. And so I certainly see the issue. I'm not sure how it should be addressed, but I understand creating a path to citizenship. But then again, if you do that, aren't you just then motivating people to bring very young children to the United States at the other end? And so it gets very difficult very quickly, but I think Biden is going to go there.
Yeah, the push-pull factors there, certainly. Ronnie, President Trump issued a number of executive orders. First, can we assume that Biden will just get rid of all of them on day one? And two, how often will Biden use his phone and a pen?
I think that he will certainly reverse as many of Trump's executive orders as he can, just like Trump reversed Obama's executive orders. Yeah. There will be some slowdown. As the Supreme Court said about President Trump, you can't just reverse it for no reason. And so there's a rule that when you do this, you have to explain your reasoning for why you do it. You just can't say, I woke up and, I had Mexican food, felt spicy, and I did this. And so you're gonna have some slowdown as to how he does it, but he's certainly going to. I don't know that he has to rule with the pen as much as the other presidents did, certainly in the first 2 years, because he controls both houses. And Biden is a consensus builder. I mean, he's been that guy since he joined in the early 70s or whenever it was. And so I don't think he's going to be as forceful in that, but more because he doesn't have to than because he doesn't want to.
Ronnie, let's look at foreign policy. President Trump was about as anti-war a president as you could, as we've gotten over the last few decades, and he certainly resisted doing too much in Syria. Could we see a more muscular foreign policy under a Biden administration?
Foreign policy, I think you get short shrift right now with everything going on, certainly in the United States with the recent votes and the problem at the Capitol and everything. But we need to pay attention to foreign policy. We're still the world's policemen. We just are. And so we've been not missing in action, but we've been pivoting to a more muscular stance against China, which appears to be the case. If you look at everything China's doing, the more you find out, the less you like, right? And you didn't like much when you started, or how they're treating their own citizens, how they're doing things around the world. And the Chinese have certainly been making inroads with their latest trade agreement with the European Union. They signed it recently, but it has been under negotiation for years. So it didn't start here. But you're seeing things like what the Russians did with Crimea and the Ukraine. And I mean, the Swedes are actually increasing their military stance because they're worried about an invasion from the Russians. And so I think we do have to become more muscular in some of these fronts. And Trump was. I think he was already going down this road. But I think it's muscular in accordance with our allies instead of standalone. Will Biden go there? I don't know, because he was certainly part of the Obama administration did this whole reset, stand back, maybe we're not the good guy thing, which I don't agree with at all. And so he said very little about foreign policy. And so I think we're all a little bit in the dark as to how he's going to pursue that.
Will we see a wind down of the trade war with China?
Yes, I think he's going to do that as a point of conciliation. And it's going to benefit American companies more than anything else.
Ronnie, I'd like to get your final thoughts on the state of politics moving forward. We've certainly seen a lot. We've seen a lot of anger on the Republican side spill over, but really, there's also a lot of Democrats who are also angry that they really haven't gotten what they want either. Do you expect this polarization to continue through a Biden presidency, or do you expect things to calm down a bit?
I fully expect it to continue. I have been a a big detractor of social media for a long time for this because of the way it is set up to feed you information that plays on everything you've already searched. And so it becomes an echo chamber, whether you want it to be or not. I mean, you're a smart person and you're searching certain stories, and based on the rest of your search history, you will be fed certain information where someone else who's looked at different stories will be fed completely different information. And so I think that's a problem with how we share information today. And I certainly blame mainstream media as much as anybody else. And so I don't see the polarization going away. We have tens of millions of people who are very frustrated with what they see as a stolen election, tens of millions of people who are very frustrated with what they see as an illegal president who's going to get away with it. And it's just crazy where we've come to, because we're not looking for the middle, because where is it? Where is it to be found? And I think it's going to continue.
Yeah, tough times ahead potentially. Rodney, I want to thank you for joining me. I want to thank all of you for watching. I'd love it if you subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, and head on over to informedamerican.com where you can get real smart news. Thanks for watching.